Hey everyone, it's Colin. How's it going? Is the internet making us stupid? I think most people would say yes, but perhaps the better question to ask is if that's necessarily a bad thing. Okay, here's the story that kind of prompted the concept for this particular episode. As you know, sometimes I will film these podcasts in the car, and if you go back and watch the very first podcast episode, I explain in fairly long-winded, I should say, detail as to why I do that. One of the things that I think a lot of you know is very important to me is trying to strive for good production quality and always trying to improve my production quality. So that even if I'm filming in the car, I want to try and give you the best possible experience that I can. And obviously when you're in the car, and this being a podcast, noise, ambient noise becomes a big issue. So long story short, I've been trying to come up with better ways to get higher quality audio when I'm shooting these podcasts in the car. So far, what I've been doing is a combination of very careful mic placement and also doing a lot of outboard noise suppression and reduction during editing. I don't really like doing that so much though, because a lot of times it can seem artificial and the sound quality overall will suffer even if the noise gets reduced. So I've been looking at some other ways to address this, and one way to address it is with proper mic selection. I've traditionally been wearing an omnidirectional lavalier mic. It's just the one that came with my wireless kit. And when you're in the car, obviously your voice is only coming from one direction, and I don't really need that ambient sound like you'd get from an omnidirectional mic. So moving to a cardioid or supercardioid mic, basically something that's more directional, makes a lot of sense. I already have one of these. I've got this Audio-Technica cardioid lav mic. It's actually very small, fairly inconspicuous. It sounds good. It's a high quality mic. The only catch is it's an Audio-Technica mic and they use one style of connector on it, yet my wireless kit is made by Sennheiser and they use a different style of connector on top. So I went online to try and find an adapter of some sort. I figured, you know, Audio-Technica and Sennheiser are two very big brand names in terms of pro audio. Somebody has to have done this before. Well, as best as I can tell, no one has done it before, or at least they've never talked about it on the internet, because after searching for a couple of months, I only came up with one place that sold an adapter, and it was just this guy on eBay. So I found that the cost was about $30 US, including shipping. Not the cheapest thing, but not terribly expensive either. So I bought one, and it was coming from the UK. I obviously live in the US, and it took a couple of weeks to show up. I get it, I plug it all in, and it doesn't work. No sound whatsoever. And I'm like, huh, okay, that's weird. So I contact the guy, ask him, you know, hey, yeah, I just received it, thank you, but it's not working right. I'm not getting any audio whatsoever. Just to confirm, I'm going from, you know, this to that, and the connectors are correct, but it's just not working. To his credit, he replies fairly quickly, says, oh, geez, I'm sorry, you know, I test all of these before I ship them out, but obviously there just must be something wrong with the adapter. Let me send you a new one. So another week and a half goes by. He ships another one out to me from the UK. It doesn't work either. Okay. Well, I know the mic itself works because I've got an Audio-Technica wireless setup, which for various reasons I just prefer the Sennheiser for when I'm shooting in the car. So I know the mic works. And obviously I know the wireless setup works because I've used it in a lot of podcasts. So what's going on here? Well, I test out the adapter myself. I get my multimeter out, probe all the connections. They're good. You know, the continuity from one end to the other is correct. So it's not like, you know, it was soldered bad and, you know, broken wires inside, anything like that. But I'm really starting to get the feeling that, you know, at that point, with how much time and money I had spent, I just should have done it myself. And so I decided, I guess I'm going to have to do it myself. So I start getting more into the research, and I find, trying to research what the Sennheiser wireless pinout is, I find this document on Sennheiser's site that tells you what it is. And after spending some time looking at that page and probing around on the adapter with the multimeter, I realized the guy who made the adapter was following that page. Obviously, there was something wrong with that information. So I start doing some more digging. I hit up Audio-Technica's site, and they don't really have any information about adapting mics between different brands. And not necessarily all vendors or brands are going to want to do that. They're not going to necessarily want to tell you how to use, the competition's equipment, that sort of thing. But I end up, after a while, searching some more and finding an article on, of all places, the knowledge base for Shure's website. Shure is another very big pro audio manufacturer. They make microphones, they make lavalier microphones. And they talked about how you can adapt a Shure lavalier mic to Sennheiser wireless. Interestingly enough, the pinout that they listed was completely different. Now, I'm sitting here thinking, what are the chances that Audio-Technica mics work and are wired up the same way as Shure mics? And I figure probably pretty similar. I mean, the technology is pretty straightforward. So I dig into the adapter and I take it all apart and I desolder everything and I rewire it the way that Shure's documentation told me to, and I plug it all in. And it worked. So what this goes to show is that you can't necessarily just trust immediately the information that you get off the internet and believe it to be true and just run with it. This is, one way that the internet has kind of, I think, made us stupid. Clearly, the guy who sold me the adapter had good intentions. I mean, he did his homework and he found this page that says, here's how you adapt wireless mics to work on Sennheiser wireless. But he didn't test it. He just believed that information to be true. He may have tested the adapter, but he probably just did continuity testing. He probably didn't connect an actual Audio-Technica lab to a Sennheiser wireless transmitter and made sure that it worked. Because if he had, it wouldn't have worked. And this whole experience has kind of gotten me thinking about more around the nature of human knowledge and how we attain it and how we treat it, how we go about our lives with it. The internet has been, at least, for pretty much everybody watching this video, the biggest thing to happen in their lives. For a lot of much older folks, things like radio and TV may be what kind of, come to mind first, because maybe those folks just aren't as into the internet. They're not using it, as heavily as some of us younger folks are. But it still, I think, draws parallels to technology that's come before it in the past. You can't necessarily believe everything you see on TV. You can't necessarily believe everything you hear on the radio. You've got to have some skepticism and everything in your life in general with regards to information that you're taking in. Yet, for some reason, a lot of people feel that if it's on the internet, it's got to be true. And they'll read it and they'll internalize it and they'll just believe it. And this is part of the biggest problem with fake news, that whole concept of fake news, these BS articles that are coming out there to try and fulfill somebody's agenda. It's just all made up. Yet people completely believe it. Fake news is just one smaller example of this problem. I think perhaps the bigger problem, but may not also actually even be a problem, is simply how much we rely on the internet for information. A lot of times we rely on it to the point where it's stuff that we really should remember, or it's information that previous generations may remember or have been forced to remember when they went through school, but now they don't. Younger people don't need to memorize that or remember it or know it because, well, the internet's prevalent and it's always there, and you can just look it up when you need it. Case in point, to some extent, I do this at work a lot. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you know that I work in IT. And I've got a wide range of technologies that I work on. I can't possibly know every single little teeny tiny detail about every product on every system that I manage. No IT person can. So to some extent, I have to rely on information that I can get if something isn't obvious when it's going wrong, or how to set it up, how to make it work. So something will break, and I'll have an idea as to what may be going on, but I may not necessarily recognize that particular error code or error message. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to either just plug it straight into Google, or I'm going to go hit up the manufacturer's website and plug it into their search engine and see what comes up. And even though that may not give me the direct answer that I need to fix the problem, it may give me a little bit of further information as to what that particular problem may be related to that leads me down the path to go and fix it. And this is a very good use of not knowing stuff and just relying on the internet, because I think it's appropriate. I think it's okay. I don't think everyone can be an expert in absolutely everything that they do, especially since the nature of work now is that a lot of us are doing more work than we have before. Coming off the recession in like 2008, 2009, through there, a lot of companies, at least, this is my perspective from living in the US, a lot of companies laid off a lot of employees. And while hiring is kind of coming, back, we're starting to hire more people again, I still feel that companies are trying to get away with having as few people on the payroll as they need to. So they're going to rely on the people they do have even more. So being able to go out and essentially Google your problems is kind of a win, at least from the company's perspective, because that's fewer people they need to hire who are quote-unquote experts in what they do. But at the same time, it also gives a little bit of support for the people who are still doing the work, so that they're not sitting there wondering, if this thing breaks, am I going to be able to fix it? Because 20 years ago, that's kind of the way it was. If you didn't know the answer to something, it would take you a lot more time to go look it up. And a lot of times you had to know the answer to something because you didn't have a quick and easy way to look it up. And it even kind of comes down to the nature of education in some ways. And this is kind of what I've been trying to lead up to, unfortunately, in I think an overly long-winded kind of way. But the nature of education seems to also be really shifting towards, how do you find the answer you're looking for? How do you digest the information that you've been given? How do you apply it? And not so much this whole kind of rote memorization of stuff. Memorizing stuff will eventually come with practice if you do something over and over again. But, I mean, you tell me, in elementary school, we had to memorize all of this stuff. Even through high school, we had to memorize all this stuff. Going through math class, we had to learn and remember how to do all of these complex equations and formulas and stuff for things that honestly, most people are never going to do in real life. I went through calculus in high school. I didn't like it. I don't like math. I went through it because I guess I'm okay at math, but I don't like it. We had to learn how to derive and integrate and all that other crap that I've totally forgotten since then. I've totally forgotten it. And it's been decades at this point, which is scary to think, but it's been decades at this point since I've graduated from high school. I don't remember how to do any of that stuff, but in the decades since I've graduated from high school, I have never once needed to use it. That's a good example, I think, of leaving it up to the internet. If I ever end up in a situation where I need to do a formula like that, well, one, I can probably just put what I need to have done into, a computer or web browser or search engine, whatever, and just find the answer. Or two, I may not even need to get that far. I may be able to just search for the particular problem that I'm having, and someone will have already come to the conclusion without me having to research how to do all the individual steps in the middle. And I think that's where, in some ways, the nature of education is headed, is that we've finally kind of come to a point where we know information is everywhere. We know that we can research anything at a moment's notice, and as long as we have our wits about us, knowing where to look, knowing how to trust information sources as being reliable or not, we can go and, find that answer very quickly. And it just really comes down to being able to apply that knowledge, knowing what to look up, knowing how to look it up, knowing how to verify that it's accurate, and then how to actually use that information to fix the problem that you're trying to solve. Or look, or whatever you're trying to do with that information. If you're trying to buy a car, knowing how to look up prices and all that sort of thing, and what all the different features and functions and everything are. You don't need to thumb through a paper brochure anymore. You can just look it all up and easily compare these things at a moment's notice. So in some ways, the internet has made us stupid in that we have less of this data in our heads that we were forced to learn in school or continually learn, at our jobs or whatever. But at the same time, I think being quote unquote stupid in that way is good in that it frees us up mentally to think, I don't want to say at kind of a higher level or a higher plane or anything kind of frou-frou sounding like that, but I think it lets us focus more on the bigger picture and not have to get so mired in all of these details necessarily, or at least not having to always need to have all those details available instantly through recollection. We can think that bigger picture term, okay, this is where I want to, start and finish. What do I need to do in the middle? Okay, Google, help me out, and it kind of gets you those bits and pieces in the middle, so you're much faster, more effective at dealing with that project, that task, whatever, as a whole. I mean, the internet has been a huge resource for me when doing YouTube videos. A lot of the information on some of the topics I've done, I do have in my head. But it's great for fact checking because something that I remember that I learned, say, 20 years ago, my memory, everyone's memory is fallible. I may be remembering it a little bit wrong, or I may not be remembering all the details. When the date that the Mac Color Classic up there was launched and when it was discontinued, I didn't remember that. I remembered the general time period and I remembered the reaction to it when it came out, that sort of thing. But being able to go and very quickly and easily research that sort of information is a huge, huge help. So the internet is kind of a double-edged sword in that way, in that it's this powerful tool and it really helps. And it kind of, in some ways, helps with human evolution. I guess you could say that's a weird thing to say, that this piece of technology helps us evolve, but in some ways the internet works and acts as big of a catalyst for change as the printing press did, as radio and TV did. So, we need to change our lives to embrace it instead of being afraid of it. And unfortunately, a lot of people are afraid of the internet, or they're afraid of what amount of integration it's already had in our lives. And I think as long as we place boundaries on it, we're going to be okay. As long as we don't let it, take us over, as long as we don't let it become an obsession, which for some people it unfortunately is, then we'll be okay. And provided we use it for good and not evil, then maybe it's okay to be a little bit stupid because of the internet. Anyway, I'm curious as to your thoughts. How much do you rely on the internet on a daily basis? Not just for your own entertainment, things like social media, but like for your job or your studies, something like that. Be sure to shout that all out, your thoughts, down in the comments below. If you liked the video, I would appreciate a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at thisdoesnotcomp. And as always, thanks for watching.